For all of the watchers of the channel that want the European Union to go from a group of loosely connected states all the way to a proper federal union, this has been a pretty good year. Now, of course, ignore this flag right here. It's not very nice, and we obviously prefer our European flag. Nonetheless, looking back at 2025, the European Parliament passed 2 motions calling for more political integration in the European Union. You know, things like removing the veto vote and more power to the Parliament. Yes, they're just motions, so nothing has happened so far. But nonetheless, this shows clear intent from the Parliament that something has to change. And something even bigger happened only last week. The European Union went to the capital markets to borrow money, together as a union, rather than individual member states. And of course, this money will be loaned to Ukraine. Now, this is a massive deal, and there's a very clear precedent of how borrowing money can result into a more federal union in the future. And for that, we need to look across the pond at America, back all the way in the 1700s, of what happened there. Before the US became a superpower, it was a loose confederation of 13 states, each facing 3 similar crises that we have in Europe today. The first one is economic chaos. Because back then, the colonies slapped tariffs on each other and issued separate currencies, making internal trade an absolute mess. And this is strikingly similar to Europe today, which still struggles with a fragmented single market where invisible regulatory barriers act like a 44% hidden tariff on goods. And for services, it gets even worse. Second, their security. The early US was so vulnerable that it couldn't even stop internal uprisings like Shays' Rebellion without the private funding of wealthy businessmen. And today, Europe faces a similar harsh reality, struggling to deter Russia after decades of neglecting its military. And then thirdly, we have debt. Most importantly, the post-war US was drowning in a mountain of debt that it had no central way to repay. And while the EU has not yet reached a breaking point, it is now sitting on over 800 billion euros in common debt with no permanent agreement on where the money will come from to pay it all back. In the US founding fathers realized that this loose club of states would ultimately fail. And by 1789, they wrote a constitution that created a supreme federal law with clear divisions of power and a central government and a constitutional court that could finally act. This shift fixed the economy by creating a common market and a single currency. But more importantly, it gave the government power to collect taxes directly. It was no longer dependent on the states. And this was super important when it came to paying back confederal debt and also state debt. And the biggest change here was philosophy. They moved away from we the states and replaced it with we the people. Because from that moment on, the federal government didn't just represent the 13 governments, it represented every single person. Interestingly, the EU has obviously never had this single Big Bang moment to create a federal state. But if you look at its DNA, you can already see federal traits emerging piece by piece. Take the division of power. It exists in the EU today, but it's nowhere near as clear-cut as in the US. Just look at foreign policy. While the US really does speak with one voice, the EU is more like a committee of 27. We have a high representative to represent the Union, yet every member state keeps its own foreign ministers and its own agenda. It leaves the Union so disjointed on the global stage, often with 27 different opinions trying to sound like one. Then there's supremacy of law. The EU has the Court of Justice, which plays a very similar role to the US Supreme Court. But, again, it's nowhere near as powerful and can only rule on the narrow areas specifically written into the EU treaties. Then, Europe also has the single market, something it is very proud of. But it's really not as seamless as many people think. Even without, physical borders, invisible barriers sadly still remain. And the IMF estimates that these barriers act like a 44% hidden tariff for goods and a staggering 110% tariff for services. I mean, compare that to the frictionless trade between the US states. We also have the currency union with the euro. It's a massive federal trait, but again, it's work in progress. Currently 20 countries use it, with Bulgaria joining on the 1st of January. Welcome to the club, Bulgaria. But that still leaves 6 countries on the outside, creating more of a two-speed Europe. But the real weak spot is fiscal power. The EU is simply not able to generate its own wealth. It has no power to tax directly, meaning it relies on member states for over 70% of its budget. And this is why common borrowing, like we saw during the pandemic and now with Ukraine, is such a huge shift. It's a massive leap towards federalism. You see, debt is kind of like its own gravity. In the past, the EU budget was just a membership fee. Countries paid. But once you have 800 billion euros in shared debt, you really have a shared future. You can't just cancel the debt if a country leaves. Instead, it ties the 27 nations together in a way that is almost impossible to undo. And this creates a massive new demand for fiscal power. Think about it logically. Eventually, that debt has to be paid back. And right now, the EU has 2 choices. It can either go to the national governments for more money, which is politically very, very toxic, especially as the nation states have massive debt themselves. Or the EU can demand the power to tax directly. And we're already seeing this. There are new proposals for EU-wide taxes on plastics, carbon, and big tech. I especially like the one on big tech. And once the EU starts collecting its own resources to pay off its common debt, it stops being a club of members and starts acting like a federal treasury. This is exactly how the United States became a real federation. Alexander Hamilton, the first Treasury Secretary, famously pushed the federal government to take on debt because he knew if the central government held the debt, it would gain the power of the purse. And as Hamilton famously said, a national debt, if it's not excessive, will be to us a national blessing. It will be the powerful cement of our union. So, yeah, it pretty much always is about the money. This is what I think. Only a week ago, I sat in this very chair and I complained quite loudly about how disappointed I was that the Russian frozen assets sitting in Belgium weren't passed over to Ukraine to help their struggle against Russia. Now, it's fair to say that that video got a lot of hate. And when I was reading all of your comments, because I really do read your comments and appreciate all the feedback, I started to realize that this joint debt that the EU is now taking on is firstly, of course, good for Ukraine, but it also has a second very positive element. And that is this move towards a more united European Union, or at least a more integrated European Union. Because as watchers of this channel know, I really think things need to change here in the Union. And this is a great first step towards a more federalized union. And coming back to the title of the video of why 2025 has been such a good year for federalism, it's not just the joint debts and the motions in the parliament. There are movements and parties across Europe that are seriously starting to gain some traction that advocate for a more positive European story. I mean, the sponsors of this video, for example, the Union of European Federalists, have seen a surge in their membership numbers in the last couple of months. And we're also seeing more and more European propaganda online. And honestly, I love it. It's such a nice counterbalance to all the negative news and all the anti-European propaganda from more far-right parties. So, to summarize, looking at this visual, it's almost as if the EU is starting to sleepwalk into a federation, slowly but surely adopting the federal traits with every new crisis that hits. And in 2026, I look forward to keeping you up to date with any new developments that happen in this area. So make sure you subscribe and watch the channel. Thank you so much for watching. And this video was sponsored by the Union of European Federalists, a pan-European organization founded in 1946 to promote a democratic and united Europe. And thank you to our presidents, Jan Schauke, Christian Peter, Alexander, Daniel Eupedia, HEVD, Kiki, Loxen, Rashid, Stefan, Unite Europe, and our newest president, Jay. Welcome to the club and see you in the next video.